social work training and practice in Zimbabwe and England have both similarities and differences due to variations in culture, history, and social welfare systems. Here's a comparative analysis. Disclaimer: these are nuggets from my own experiences, hence may not reflect the true and correct situation on the ground, as I last practiced in Zimbabwe in 2006. A lot may have changed since then. There was only about 2 OIR3 universities offering a social work qualification back then. You should also remember that Zimbabwe is considered a third world country, whereas England is a first world country. Let's dive into it now, but please feel free to comment after watching, as this will help me improve the quality and content we give you on our channel Training 1. Education levels. In Zimbabwe, social work education typically starts at the diploma level, with some universities offering bachelor's degrees. There are now more universities than there was in 2000. More universities are now offering master's and PhD level degrees. The entry qualification for studying social work is more stringent in Zimbabwe as compared to England. However, the practical training and standards are way below what you would find in England. In contrast, England offers both undergraduate, BA/BSc, and postgraduate, MA/MSW, degrees in social work. There are also a variety of entry programs to social work like the frontline and apprenticeship programs which do not exist in Zimbabwe. You have various professional standards enforced in England, whereas the same standards do exist in Zimbabwe but are selectively enforced. For example, people not social work trained usually use the title, whereas in England, social worker is a protected title. 2. Duration. Social work degree programs in England typically take 3 years for undergraduates and 1 or 2 years for postgraduates. In Zimbabwe, diploma programs are shorter, usually 2 years, while degree programs take you a maximum of 4 years to complete. 3. Curriculum. The curriculum in England places a strong emphasis on academic and research-based learning. In Zimbabwe, there is often a focus on practical skills and community-based learning due to resource constraints. The curriculum in Zimbabwe also speaks to the current presenting problems in the country, is more focused on social work with groups and communities, whereas in England, it's more social work with individuals. Moving on to practice standards now. I reckon there is a growing number of international social workers who have trained in Zimbabwe and moved to practice in England. In this video, I try to look at the experiences shared by some of them. I also reckon the impact of culture on these journeys and the cultural adaptation migrating social workers go through. There are some cultural differences in relation to the place of the individual compared to the community, and in relation to risk, corporal punishment and domestic violence. It's known that social workers from Zimbabwe, due to sharing the educational systems, and Zimbabwe being a former colony of the Britain, the Zimbabwean trained social workers are able to transfer some basic social work knowledge and skills acquired from Zimbabwe to England with relevant adjustments. The overseas Zimbabwean social workers also bring what is perceived to be broader skill sets, which added a new dimension to the diversity and skills matrix of children's social care system England. I view the successes of most overseas Zimbabwean social workers in their attempts to transfer knowledge and skills from Zimbabwe to England confirmed a changing approach in the transfer of knowledge and skills from the global south to the developed north. This is a change from the traditional unidirectional approach where knowledge and skills have always transferred from the north to the south. 1. Caseloads. Social workers in England often have high caseloads, which can impact the amount of time they can spend with each client. This compromises the client-worker relationship and the quality of outcomes. In Zimbabwe, caseloads may be lower, allowing for more individualized attention. The social fabric in Zimbabwe also allows for a wider family network to support families in distress, more as compared to England. Most cases in Zimbabwe are open and shut cases, as client or service users are able to use the existing family support systems. It takes a village to raise a child on the Zimbabwean context, whereas the individualistic nature of life in England may mean issues usually take longer to be dealt with. From my experiences, folks do not wait for a family network meeting or a family group conference for them to spring into action and know that they need to support their sister's or brother's child or even their grandchildren. GDPR laws, data protection laws, need for consent, etc. All these slows down progress and at times needs be cautiously navigated, whereas in Zimbabwe such laws rarely exist, and issues are discussed openly quickly seeking solutions. 2. Client diversity. England has a diverse population, with social workers working with clients from various cultural backgrounds. This presents challenges of its own, which I will not dwell on in this video. In Zimbabwe, the client base may be more homogeneous in terms of culture and language. Though there are a few different tribes, most people speak mainly Shona and Ndebele, hence the helping relationship has easily built and prolonged well. You need to vastly cultural competent to excel in your practice in England. There is a video on cultural competence which I posted a few months ago. 3. Legal framework. Both countries have their own legal frameworks for social work practice. In England, social workers operate within the framework of the Children Act of 1989, Mental Health Act, and the Care Act, among a plethora of others. The Children Act. 1989, used in England, states that children's welfare should be the paramount concern of the courts. It also specifies that any delays in the system processes will have a detrimental impact on a child's welfare. There is also the Children's Act of 2004, which places emphasis on duties of various professionals. The Children's Act of 2004 is a development from the 1989 Act. It reinforced that all people and organizations working with children have a responsibility to help safeguard children and promote child welfare across England. In Zimbabwe, social work practice is guided by the Social Workers Act, the Children's Act, Chapter 506 of and other relevant legislation. The Children's Act, Chapter 506 in Zimbabwe, prohibits assault, ill treatment and abandonment of children by their parents and guardians. It provides for the registration of residential care institutions before accepting children into these institutions. In Zimbabwe, over half of all children are still not registered at birth. Non-registered children are invisible and particularly vulnerable to abuse. They are often refrained from access to basic social services. Several forms of violence against children are prevalent in Zimbabwe. There are also a few social protection programs that have been put in place in Zimbabwe to assist orphaned and vulnerable children. The programs inter alia includes BEAM, adoption, institutionalization, free treatment orders, and the National Plan of Action for Orphans and Vulnerable Children. It is argued that though the programs are commendable, they have gaps which need to be addressed. That could be a story for another day. 4. Resources and services. England generally has better resources and a more developed social welfare system, including a broader range of specialized services and support for vulnerable populations. In Zimbabwe, limited resources and economic challenges can impact the availability of services. The social safety nets that used to exist in Zimbabwe are not there anymore. Hence, the service users now have less resources they can be signposted to as compared to England. 5. Supervision and support. Social workers in England often have access to regular structured supervision and support from their line managers, and this is protected time. In Zimbabwe, these structures may be less formalized. Supervision can be ad hoc and times non-existent, as you can be the only social worker in a district office, and your immediate manager resides in another town miles away. This tends to be on case-by-case basis and sporadic. 6. Cultural competency. In both countries, cultural competency is crucial. Social workers need to understand and respect the cultural norms and values of the communities they serve. Watch my other video on cultural competence on this channel. Right now, that we have explored all these, the next question is, what are the challenges? 1. Resource constraints. Zimbabwe faces economic challenges, which can limit the availability of resources for social work practice, including funding for social services and training. Though there are funding challenges and budget cuts in England, this can't be compared to Zimbabwe. One thing for sure is Zimbabweans are generally resourceful and hardworking. Even the diaspora remittances have helped stabilize a situation which could have been dire in Zimbabwe. 2. Migration. Both countries may experience migration of social workers seeking better opportunities elsewhere, which can impact the workforce in both nations. England is losing social workers to New Zealand and Australia, whereas Zimbabwe is losing them to countries like South Africa, Namibia, UK, Australia, and New Zealand. Most social workers who qualified in Zimbabwe have since left the country in search of greener pastures. England is also losing social workers due to the pressures in daily practice, and some do turn to be locum, and some leave the profession for good to do something else altogether. 3. Policy and legislative changes. Both countries are constantly undergoing changes in social welfare policies and legislation, requiring social workers to stay informed and adapt to evolving practices. It's your duty to stay up to date with current trends, etc. In conclusion, while social work shares common principles and goals globally, the specific training and practice in Zimbabwe and England are influenced by their unique contexts, including historical, cultural, and resource-related factors. Social workers in both countries play a vital role in supporting vulnerable populations and promoting social justice, albeit within different systems and conditions. Thank you for watching this video. Please kindly like the video, subscribe,